and this is the patch 10.5 notes rundown. I actually don't know anything inside of this patch other than that Graves gets buffed, and I know about the Ornn nerfs, and I know about the Amumu revert. So let's just get into it. I will check out the skins, obviously, at the very end. Champions, Alistar, base health increase, passive stat gain, no longer has a cooldown after Alistar Rowers. Health is up by 25, passive Triumphant Roar. Once Triumphant stacks are consumed, Alistar can gain new stacks after a 3-second delay to immediately Triumphant Roar. Still can't proc more than once every 3 seconds. Doesn't really do anything for him. Our Amumu cooldown increased early. We're pulling back on some of the power we gave him in 10.4. Our Curse of the Sad Money. 130 to 100 seconds cooldown to 150 to 100 seconds. So obviously, his ult being so heavy relative to how he itemizes and stuff is really problematic because he just doesn't get CDR until way later. I actually don't know the rationale behind this. Is it really just because he's a powerhouse and lower MMR or something? It really is very, very strange. I feel like there's other ways that they could probably take balanced approaches. Obviously, Amumu still doesn't really hack it at higher MMR, and for solo queue, he's still probably one of the best. Or solo queue down at lower MMR is still probably one of the best. Bard, passive time damage decreased. After history of journeying onto the radar, Bard has to be pulled back a bit due to how much he's succeeding at high level of play. We're slightly reducing the impact of the Meep Sweep Chime music. Additional damage per 5 chimes is 15 to 12. So maybe this ends up equating to like one of his auto attacks, like super late game or something. But realistically, early on in mid game, this probably doesn't influence whether or not Bard's going to kill you at all. So I think in that regard, it's fine. I think Bard is one of the best support champions in the entire game right now, and I think that he is extremely underappreciated. But due to his extremely high skill ceiling and extremely high floor, in order to actually pilot him at a proficient level, I think that it just doesn't work out that well. So I mean, this nerf probably doesn't really do anything. I mean, obviously it'll do something, but so far all of these changes don't really do anything. They're just sort of filler. Blitzcrank base armor decreased 46 to 37, or 40 to 37. This doesn't really do anything either. You're not really picking Blitzcrank, worrying about maybe an auto attack inside of lane throughout the entire duration. So it is a small little nerf, but again, so far no real meaningful changes in this patch. Base MR and MR growth increase. Q cost now flat, cooldown decrease. Graves has been weak for higher tier play and miding for everyone else. Giving him back some of the magic resistance we pulled off of Z, as well as a buff aimed to help him both his jungle and laning. Magic resistance 30 to 32, so he gets 2 right there. And then magic resistant growth is up by 0.25. So this is kind of nice for mid lane Graves if you end up doing the Negan build from, or that's what it's coined, where you just go basically full lifeline, lifesteal Graves, and you end up going tanky with Spirit Visage and like Death Stance, Bloodthirster, etc. Obviously, it requires the enemy team to have a lot of melee champions or a lot of champions that want to stick on top of you without a real ability to lock down Graves or anything of that nature. So the stars have to pretty much align for that. In terms of what these changes mean inside of the jungle, it doesn't really do all that much. Graves isn't being gated because of his lack of magic resistance right now. He has a lot of other issues. I think he's still like a bottom A tier jungle in certain spots, depending on what the enemy team composition is, as long as he's able to go lethality. Q end of the line costs 60 to 80 mana to 60 mana. Cooldown 13 to 9 seconds to 12 to 8 seconds. This is kind of nice once you end up... this is just nice overall. This is actually a very nice little change. This helps him be more reckless, obviously, with his mana costs inside of the jungle. It lets him stay relevant on the map for longer. And also for mid lane Graves, this is really, really, really massive because one of the issues that he can actually run into is against certain mid lane champions, he can just get endlessly shoved in, and if his mana problems can just be attacked, and then he can't actually wave clear and get a reset that cleanly. Kai'Sa QAP ratio decreased, upgraded missiles increased, W base damage and AP ratio increased, 80 decreased, upgrade cooldown refund increased. The goal of these changes are to power up Kai'Sa as she evolves, especially if she starts to specialize in either AP or AD. However, there should be more of a trade-off based on that evolution. Icathian Rain, damage ratio 0.4 ability power to 0.25 ability power. Living weapon upgrade 10 missiles to 12 missiles. Okay. W Void Seeker, 20 to 120 plus 0.6 ability power plus 1.5 total AD to 30 to 130 plus 0.7 ability power plus 1.3 total attack damage. Living weapon 50% cooldown refunded 70%. So this is helping AP Kai'Sa a lot more than AD Kai'Sa, I'm assuming. I think that Kai'Sa's in a really weird spot in the meta where the stars haven't really aligned for her to come back, and I think that if the meta keeps progressing the way that it is, I think that the AD carries that will eventually start coming back are just going to be better against her. She's obviously a pretty unique AD carry that is very limited by her numbers as well as the itemization and the meta around her. I just, even though she's starting to get picked again in certain regions, I really just think that it's more so AD carries are getting very bored. But also, because all the 80 carries that rose to power in the last couple of months, most notably Senna, Aphelios, and Misfortune, they keep getting slightly hit, and then the meta is just shifting around. And so when that ends up happening, the old 80 carries that were just a tier below them can obviously end up slightly coming back up. Kayn, passive orb decrease, W slow increase. Smoothing out Kayn's transform rules so he's not punished due to confusion or complexity. We're adding a slight buff to catching ability to make him easier to succeed with passive. The Darkened Scythe. Orb gain rate increases at 8 and 12 minutes to increases constantly every second after 5 minutes, flattening out at 13 minutes. W Blade's Reach, decaying slow 67%. This isn't getting Kayn at all. Lissandra QAP ratio increase 0.7 to 0.8 ability power. Lissandra doesn't tend to actually stack a lot of AP, so this doesn't really do all that much, even though it is one of her spammable abilities. Probably ends up amounting to something like maybe 150 damage in late stage team fights, and that's provided that Lissandra is able to live very long and able to cast multiple Qs. And this is mostly because her itemization tends to be in its current state something like Protobelt into Zhonya's Hourglass, and then it takes a while for her to ramp into something else meaningful. And so these are not heavy hitting AP items by any means, so a slight 0.1 ability power buff doesn't really do all that much to it. And again, she only is able to basically be picked in very thin situations where she's not only a counter to the enemy team, but also to her lane opponent. Most typically, she gets seen against LeBlanc in mid, when there's also a lot of other melees or decaying champions on the enemy team. Neeko, base attack speed growth and ratio increased, EAP ratio increased, R shield increased, giving Neeko some buffs in any situation, no matter what shape she takes. Attack speed growth is up by 0.5, so she almost ends up getting a dagger. E Tangle Bard, 0.4 ability power to 0.6. This is actually really, really big for AP Neeko. And then our Pot Blossom, 50 to 110 plus 0.5 ability power to 75 to 125 plus 0.75 ability power. This actually equates to probably several hundred HP at the end of it. Yeah, I would guess this late game on AP Neeko can end up making like 200 HP, so she ends up getting like 400 HP or like 400 gold of value on this buff. I don't think these changes help her enough. This is obviously kind of sizable because this is one of her spammable and key abilities. I think that these changes actually help out AP Neeko support more than it helps out AP mid Neeko or top Neeko. Ornn, passive empowered damage decreased, item auto upgrade level increased, ally item upgrade available later. We're lowering his damage a bit and reverting a prior buff that we originally put into Ram back into pro play. The Ram's now a little too aggressive and butting heads way too often. Living Forge, brittle proc damage 12 to 20.5% targets max health at levels 1 to 18 to 10 to 18% of targets max health levels 1 to 18. So this doesn't really impact jungle Ornn. For top lane Ornn, his lethal range is already so obnoxious that this doesn't really matter. And then once you get into the mid and late stages of the game, you're not really picking Ornn for this purpose to deal damage. So all of this ends up doing is it gives some matchups that are like pretty close with Ornn in skill a little bit more room to trade against him and have abilities to out-sustain him or look for a lethal opening. Masterwork item auto upgrade level 12 to 13. Ally Masterwork availability is now also up by 1 level. This doesn't really matter all that much, given that typically right now inside of the meta, support champions don't actually get an ornament upgrade. So these levels really matter, and Ornn is pretty easily able to get to these levels when it's still meaningful. Obviously, this last one is probably going to come in on like jungler or something most of the time, like Black Cleaver. But also a lot of the junglers right now actually just don't even build ornaments, so you're really just looking at 14 and 15, which is totally reasonable. This doesn't really address why Ornn is giga broken or strong right now, so it's really nice to see that he's still going to remain relevant in the meta. Rammus base attack speed ratio decreased. Wasn't actually okay like we thought, pulling back some of the power from 10.4 buffs. I never saw Rammus once, so I have no idea. Sett, base armor, health regen, and health regen growth decreased. Our slow duration decreased. Armor is down by 4. That's actually kind of big. Health regen is down by 1. So I guess he ends up losing like an auto attack usually by first reset. But the way that his passive works, I don't know how exactly that's going to work out. Health regen growth 0.75 to 0.5. Our showstopper 1 second to target in all enemies in the impact area. Sett probably gets assist credit even when the target dies while suppressed. That's a nice assist bug fix. I don't think that, again, much like Ornn, I think that they're being extremely careful with the changes. I think that both of these champions are still going to be competitively viable. Sett isn't a champion that you should ever be able to pick first, but I think that teams are really bad at drafting. And in addition to that, I think that his weaknesses aren't able to be exploited due to a lot of things are just a mess right now, but also, again, dynamics of drafting. So I think in competitive, he's still going to be pretty fine. Q Sivir, damage increase later. Our minimum movement speed now scales. Sivir is on the weaker side across all games, so we're buffing her. Q boomerang damage, 35 to 115, plus 0.7 to 1.1 total attack damage. Ability power doesn't matter. 35 to 95, plus scales up to 1.3 total attack damage. Okay, R on the hunt. Minimum movement speed 20% to, and it scales up. So you can end up getting boots. Yeah, you can end up getting boots, or actually tier 2 boots, depending on what champion you are. So you'll either end up getting tier 1 boots for free or tier 2 boots for free in the later stages with Sivir. Again, I don't think this is enough to make her come back into the meta. So on a base AD and AD growth increased, E-self movement speed increased now and flat. Attack damage 45 to 49, attack damage growth 2 to 3, E-song celerity, self movement speed 10 to 14% to 20%. This is actually insane. I think that a lot of people overreacted to the Sona changes last patch. And she's still actually prevalent even in high Korean solo queue challenger. There are still people that are doing the Sona strategy in top lane. And in regards to how she is in support bot lane, she's still basically in the same exact situation she was before. Out of range cast changes. Ability changes, Misfortune, E make it range. Oh, okay. Syndra Q, Darksphere. When you try to cast an ability outside its max range, one of two things will happen. Either you'll walk into range and then cast the ability, or the ability will automatically cast at max range in that direction. We're changing the 3 abilities below to follow the cast at max range behavior based on how we see players, especially newer players, try to use them. In Syndra's case, this specifically makes her QE combo easier to pull off. While mains will need to relearn the feel for how these abilities cast at long ranges, our intent isn't to add or remove significant power. We'll follow these up if need be. Misfortune, E make it rain. I think that one's totally fine. Varus E, Hail of Arrows. I think that one's totally fine. Syndra's one, I don't think is totally fine. Because a lot of times as a control mage, you're trying to specifically plan where you're trying to cast an ability while you might even be moving towards it. And I think that this is actually going to make it so awkward for her in some spots in mid game and even late game, as well as maybe even setting up ganks in early game. I'm really... This feels bad to see Darksphere on here. Jungle champions, Darius, health damage to monsters 120 to 175%. Darkness rise, max damage to monsters 25 to 110. Levels 1 to 18 to 28 to 164. Levels 1 to 18. I don't know if this makes Mordekaiser able to exist inside of the jungle. Again, I would have to go back and look at his previous nerfs, because maybe this is actually where he was at on release, and on release, he still wasn't able to actually reliably jungle, and he still had a million problems going on. This combined with the fact that certain other junglers are just going to be able to offer more, as well as the jungle changes that happen coming into Season 10, I don't think that it makes really good news for Mordekaiser. That being said, though, some of his items are actually really easy and affordable to get, and he tends to have a lot of power with 1 or 2 item completions, but I think that the only time that Mordekaiser would ever pivot into jungle is when you need to pivot him into jungle, because he gets hard countered if you blind him, but you shouldn't be blinding Mordekaiser anyway. The Poppy change is the biggest one, because Poppy is actually competitively viable even at pro tier level play, as well as in solo queue. This is a massive, massive buff for Poppy jungle. Top lane significance, turret plates grant more gold from melee champions and more resilient to group pushes. 120 to 160, this actually makes the Demolish rune a little bit more viable, whereas Font of Life, I think, is just the better rune currently in the current patch 10.4. Range resistant turret plates take 17% reduced damage from ranged champions. That's really, really big. Out at her, this also incentivizes roaming a lot more on ranged champions in both top and in mid lane. Out of her armor and MR 40 to 200 plus at 0 to 4 plates lost to 15 to 155 at 0 to 4 plates lost. So This is a lot easier now for melee champions to take turrets. This is way easier for melee champions to take turrets. So like all wave clear, like wave pushing, mid lane or top laners, mid laners, etc. Melee champions that take demolish, like Alawi. This is a really big buff for her. A nice little buff for like Fiora. I suppose it's a nice buff for Jace, who's actually coming back because he can just go melee form. Out of turret armor and MR after all plates, 40 unchanged. Okay. Blade of the Ruined King. Current health damage increase for melee champions. Blade of the Ruined King has been out of fighter inventories for a while now. We're buffing it to be a luxury option for shedding through juggernauts and tanks. Basic attacks deal bonus physical damage on hit equal to 8% to 8% of the target's current health for ranged users, 12% for target's current health for melee users. It's really big for certain champions, obviously. I don't think that it still makes it onto like Tryndamere or anything like that. But I do believe that like champions like Jax could probably end up utilizing this pretty effectively now because that actually is quite a big steroid. I'm not sure about other melee champions that would actually want to use this. I'm trying to think of ones off the top of my head and none are really coming to me. So obviously this is a massive buff for Master Yi as well. Not really sure. I guess Jace can use this because he goes Blade of the Ruined King in some builds, but I think that Monomune Lethality Jace is just really big. But other stuff really just isn't coming to mind. I suppose Pantheon can maybe use this, but you'd have to really do the math to see if it's worth justifying just to use this W. Ravenous Hydra lifesteal is up by 6%. Active radius 400 to 450. Active center point 125 persistent up to 200. Okay, sorry, Rengar. At your basic attack range up to 200 distance. Sorry, Rengar. Titanic Hydra passive damage to targets in the cone area. We're buffing Titanic Hydra's health scaling to increase the threat it presents in HP heavy builds. Okay. 5 plus 1% uses max HP to 0.5. Okay. 40 to 40 plus. Okay, so 0.5 in both. This is obviously a fantastic change for all the champions that use Titanic Hydra. So these Hydra buffs are really, really nice. Item Stealthy Edge, Tribute proc now require a nearby ally. Oh, okay, so maybe this is why they're giving some more power back to Sona. Removing support items from being used in solo lanes. This does really suck when you're a support and you end up getting kills down in bot lane, but your AD carry is missing. This definitely sucks. Spectre Sickle, removing support items from being used in solo lanes. Tribute procs now require an ally, even dead ally champions. Oh, okay, even dead ally. That's actually completely fine. This doesn't affect Fasting Senna. Boots of Mobility is now up by 100 gold. This is actually a really big nerf to champions like Talon as well as Qiyana. Qiyana actually now has to stay for one additional wave, which is really big because that one additional wave, depending on who's CSing perfectly, but typically Qiyana has less CS than her opponent, which means that against mages, they're probably going to be really close to getting Lost Chapter. Boots of Swiftness movement speed increased. I actually already thought it was at 60, so I have no idea why, but Coach Caster content creator, by the way. Air and bounce percentages don't really matter. Eternals are available starting at 10.5. Capture, celebrate, and flex your moments of glory in and out of the game on your main and track your... Okay, cool. Bug fixes. Nice. Upcoming skins and chromas. All right, so before we get to the thing that you guys are all really here for, let's recap. Alistar change doesn't really matter. Amumu change doesn't really matter. Bard change doesn't really matter. Blitzcrank change doesn't really matter. Graves change is mostly really big for mid and top Graves, but doesn't really do all that much for jungle Graves, except to allow him to be a little bit more reckless inside of the jungle, but that's not what's gating him from being competitively viable. Kaisa change is really nice. Kayn change is mostly irrelevant. Lissandra change mostly irrelevant. Neeko change I think is much better for support Neeko than it is for mid and top Neeko, but I think that it is it's moving the needle in the right direction. Ornn change is nothing to overreact to because teammates typically don't build Ornn items anyway, and this isn't why you're picking Ornn or what is making Ornn so strong. Rammus base attack speed ratio, never really saw Rammus. Sett is still going to be completely viable, especially in matchups where he's against magic damage dealers. The armor is mostly going to be irrelevant. Sivir changes is not enough to make her come back into the meta. Sonar change obviously makes sense. Misfortune and Varus ones are completely fine. The Syndra one is obviously the change that I think is most curious. Darius change is really big. Mordekaiser, again, I have to look at it. Poppy is by far, I think, the biggest change in the entire patch. Poppy is the best change in the entire patch. Go out, play jungle Poppy. She's really nice. Blade of the Ruined King, I think, is the second biggest change inside of this entire patch. So that's nice. And then the turret... Well, actually, I'm sorry. The turret platings is the second biggest change, and then Blade of the Ruined King. Turret platings are really nice for melee champions as well as Jace if he ends up going melee form. Hydra changes are really nice. Spell Thief, Spectre's Sickle doesn't really matter all that much. Obviously, Senna's still able to fast. Boost of Mobility really does hurt Sinner champions. Boost of Swiftness, again, I didn't even know about it. Okay. Now we're done with that. This was sort of like a patch rundown speed run. Black Frost Renekton. Okay. So this sort of looked like Anivia's children. So I don't really know. This actually sort of looks like the hype train emote when you complete the hype train on Twitch, which kind of looks cool. But whatever. So it looks like Anivia slept with Twitch Prime and maybe had a hype train, and now she has a kid. Black Frost Alistar. Oh, it was in the same thing. I don't really know what to think of this. Obviously, it looks like a really cool skin, but it almost also looks like it could almost be a champion in itself, and typically I don't like skins like that. Black Frost Rek'Sai. This looks really cool, but it also just looks like Anivia. Like, this definitely just looks like maybe it could be Anivia at a different angle. So, this doesn't really do anything for me. I don't know. Hextech Sejuani. Really? This looks like the mount from World of Warcraft. This looks like Dollarin. Any truers or what? Anyways, guys, to conclude this, solo queue is basically not getting a lot of change inside of this patch by any means. Play more melee child planers or something. Restart taking the Demolish rune. Maybe play Negan version of Graves. And then also patreon.com/AlicXYZ9 for the solo queue 10.5 tier list as well as Clash. See you later.